Oh, and we're back. Oh my goodness. I do apologize. I apologize, everyone. We're back. So I know that we do have, I know some of you made it back to the session. I'm so glad that you did. So my power just went out, which just interrupted the whole broadcast. And then I had to start a whole new Facebook event and then re-invite Penny and all of that. So I really do apologize, y'all. I have no idea what happened. Power just went out. So we got a few of us back here. That's good. So Penny, I don't know where you left off, but I know that one of the big questions that people have been asking is how we integrate natural building into landscape projects. And so
Yeah, I did answer that. I told the story of my digging the pond and the duck shortage and building the office and all the all the
tell us
things you can
again.
do.
Tell us again, Penny, because I think the broadcast cut out before you were able to get
Oh,
your
really?
story.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Also, I'm not on YouTube right now, so I can't see if there's any questions. Is there any trick to getting back on there, or do I
Oh,
need?
I'll send that to you, but I'll
Okay.
prompt you with the questions for now.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, well, I basically, I needed to get ducks because we had a duck shortage because we had so many snails and slugs. So I dug a pond for the ducks, and they and so the the soil, the subsoil from the pond, I ended up building a office with that 120 square foot office that was, it had a light straw clay back wall and a cob side and front walls, and it was very curvilicious and curvilinear. And we also put a dragon shaped oven on there. I wish I could have a picture of that right now to show you. Maybe we could send one somehow, but I'd have to dig it out. But we had a dragon head oven attached to it. And so the idea was that, the soil came from the pond, and then the pond was habitat for the ducks that ate the bugs in the garden. And then the roof water from the office that we built would also help replenish and keep the pond topped up when it rained. And then during the dry season, I installed a gray water system from the main house and put it through a little mini marsh for our laundry and bath water, which, that's quite a bit of water, and that kept the pond topped up all year. And then sometimes we would what we call fertigate, because all the duck, you know, feces and everything they do in the
Poop.
garden, poop, was really good fertilizer for the plants. So I had it designed so I could just, nothing was glued. None of the attachments were glued, and I could put a little, just take one off and put in a slide another fitting on there that I could attach a hose to the pond pump, and then I could pump water all over the garden and just water with the pond water, which ultimately became my office. And but I was saying also is that you could build benches and ovens and walls. You can put in niches in the walls, and with electrical conduit, and put in lighting. And I mean, it could be really beautiful. And I don't think it's been fully explored to the fully creative capacity that it could be in landscaping. So that's what I said.
Well, I mean, I love that integrated system, and I think that what's so exciting about that is that you're using on-site resources. The fact that you dug out the pond and then you got that material to build the office and build the benches and the oven and all of that. And I think that often when we're doing soil work on a project, that folks aren't thinking about natural building. So
Right.
we grade, we feather the soil out on the site, or in some cases they might even get hauled off site because they don't want to deal with all that subsoil. How would one go about navigating the educating and I guess selling a client on, say, a cob bench or a cob oven, or do you think it's cost effective, one, to do that, and two, is there anything that you've found in terms of talking to folks, clients about these structures that have helped them, get excited or more into it?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, showing pictures, and if it's not pictures of your own projects, pictures of projects of things that you like, that's A. And then B, when it comes to things like, especially benches I think it's absolutely cost effective, but it's only really cost effective if it doesn't look like a concrete wall. It's cost effective if it's a beautifully designed sculptural wall. It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, I think simple is better often. In fact, out for exterior natural building, you don't want a lot of fine detail. You want fairly, broad detail because sometimes it does erode a little bit. But yeah, I think if you just show pictures, and then if you're willing at the beginning to kind of do some volunteer work on it, to give them a deal. So it's kind of like you're getting paid for your education at the same time is one of the ways I look at it. So I wouldn't charge I often never charge every single hour that I would put into design and all the research and, just the things that I have to do to make an experimental project come alive. But that's okay because I got paid for learning.
Yeah, I really feel that too. When you learn on the job, you can create a deal for the client and learn a new skill. But now that you're, such an experienced natural builder, do you feel like is there a market for natural building, in landscape? I mean, is this a good place? Like if students wanted to, maybe we might have some natural builders on in the school right now. And, would that be a good thing for them to market as part of their services, or is it too fringe, or, anything else about that?
That's a good question. I think it depends on where you are, in California. Well, interestingly, I just completed a 4-year stint on the Building Appeals Board for the County of Marin. And now, by ordinance, natural buildings are permittable in Marin County. And I don't think any projects, I know, right? But we need to get the word out. But I think but for landscaping things like benches and ovens are a little problematic. I would be a little weary of doing an oven because sometimes the bottom layers I've seen with very many professional oven builders, they kind of get a little sand in your pizza. But benches are much more, and little chairs and maybe an outdoor kitchen, where you're doing, building like a barbecue. I'm doing also a distillation stove for my distiller that's outside, or even just altars or, sculptural elements in the garden. I mean, there's just the sky's the limit, and the creativity has not been explored to a minuscule degree at this point. So the downside of that is you don't have a lot of projects to point to. It's not mainstreamed. So I guess my answer to you would be no, Eric. It's not, it's not out there. So your clients are going to be the more adventurous ones that want to try something new. And also I would say, if you could find a mentor to teach people how to work with lime finishes and lime washes, there's a lot of experimenting that needs to be done. And the advantage of lime washes is that you can get a much more durable exterior finish on your natural buildings. If you have a roof over it, you're golden. But if it's getting on the rain, they do kind of last, but you have to kind of redo them every year or every 2 years. But it doesn't take very long, to refinish a bench, for example. And you probably do it in 2 hours. But it does need maintenance, and it's not as durable. So the clients, one thing, when you're working with clients on experimental things, it's really good to warn them clearly, maybe even in writing, to say this will erode, or if you're digging a contour swale, it will blow. It may blow out, and it's okay. It's okay. Let the water tell us where it wants to go, because sometimes it's very difficult to know exactly the volume of water that's going to be coming off a hill if you're going to be doing any kind of water retention things like contour swales. I don't know if you've talked about that with your group yet. Water harvesting and contours.
We haven't had an expert hangout on it, but I do talk about it in the core curriculum.
Yeah.
And yeah. So we do have a couple other questions, and I did find I did send you the link, Penny, to get to the chat, both in the chat box here, and then I send you an email with that link if you want to get to the chat there.
Okay.
And so let me take this. We've got a couple great questions. Thank you, everybody. And I think I'm going to take Adam's question first because it's still connecting to the natural building stuff. And then I'll move into your other question. So Adam is asking, do you find adding benches and creative landscape elements to your designs help keep the clients excited and happy?
Yeah, I do. I think, if somebody has, but if it's beautiful. And, one thing I've noticed in a lot of natural building people is they don't finish. You have to really finish. And when you, like, for example, if you build a stone foundation and you build a bench, I just did this with a class down in Santa Cruz. I think was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday or the day before. And we plastered a bench, but what we did is we went around and we carved really clean lines around all the stone around the foundation, and the people like really did detail work around finishing, especially where the stone foundation comes into the earthen part of the bench. And it just popped and it looked so beautiful. People couldn't believe it. I mean, just that little detail of making it, like we got some like metal, there were like spackle knives or something, I don't know, or trowels, but just got some metal trowels and carved really clean lines. And that, so if you have something like that really stands out and it's really extraordinary, yes, people will be excited, but don't skimp on the detail finishing. Do a good job and make it really beautiful and stunning.
And I think that is a good lead into one of the questions that were asked, which was, how do you handle clients who value the looks of something over the function or in conflict with the function of the design?
What do you mean? I don't understand.
Yeah. So let's see. So how do you handle the clients who value the look of something or the function?
Oh.
So they value the aesthetics of something more than the function. So they want to keep something unfunctional but beautiful, or they want something to be aesthetic. They want to have less function in order to gain more aesthetic. Is that an issue that you see? Or
well, you've got the one thing to remember as a designer is it's their garden. It's not your garden, it's their garden. And to do what they want, because they're the ones that are going to have to live with it. And if you don't agree with it, then either don't take the job or comply with what it is they want, because I think that's a really important thing. And there might be a reason why they, it's hard to answer it really well without maybe a specific situation, but with a generic question like that, that's what I would say is give the client what they want.
Yeah. So another question, I'm just going to keep rolling with some of the questions here. The response to that is like a lawn versus native grasses as an example.
Well, you can, I'm not totally anti-lawn if you're going to actually be using the lawn and running around on it. Like if you're going to, you can talk about the resources that lawns take, the benefits. One of the things I do with clients is I tell them that just sort of non-judgmentally the pros and cons of each idea. So you could say, well, here's a lawn. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to mow it, and it's, you'll have to keep it watered. And if you don't get it watered, it's going to have brown spots. But the advantage is it's flat. if you want to play and run around on it. It's not, clumpy like a native bunchgrass lawn is. And a native lawn has it's got a certain type of beauty. It's much more drought tolerant. The roots are deeper. It's like you can tell the people the pros and cons. And really, if they just want chemicals and they just want it to, have a green thing here and there, that's probably not your client. That's not ecological landscaping. You're going to want to be attracting, like however you advertise for your business, you should, theoretically be attracting people who want something that's more ecological. But what I started to say is a lawn as a green cover, if you've got little kids and you want something soft to play on and it's small and it's just where kids are running around, I don't see anything wrong with the lawn. There's plenty of lawns that don't really require that much water that you can plant, but to just have a lawn that nobody ever goes on and it just sits out there and you just mow it and water it and mow it and water it, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah. But if you're playing on it, and you've got kids and you're playing ball or whatever, I don't know, it seems fine to have a lawn.
Right. And of course it's context dependent. I know, I know our student who's asking that particular question about lawns lives in an arid environment, is working in, in the Southwest. And so water's a greater issue there. Yeah. But I love that, the pros and cons and really laying it out for clients. And then, in the end, it is their garden and they are making decisions. And then we have to decide whether we, want to work with that or not.
Yeah, because if you're really anti-lawn and they really want a lawn, then you're probably not that compatible of client, and maybe don't take the job.
What if it's your only job lead this month?
Then you got to sell your soul and put in a lawn. I don't know.
Right. Okay. So next question here is, listen to this one carefully. So what is the area of focus for new permaculture practitioners that creates the greatest progress, both in building a sustainable business and developing the skill to design functional ecosystems?
You're going to have to say it again because I'm not seeing it in front of me.
That's okay.
I thought I could read along with it, but it's not here.
What is the area of focus for new permaculture practitioners that creates the greatest progress? So, what are the trends or niches that we can, step into?
Wow.
That has like that bigger impact, both from a business point of view and developing skills to design functional ecosystems?
Well, I think I would say probably medicinal gardens. Like one idea, I have a lot of ideas because I'm not doing landscaping anymore, but one idea would be to plant like food and medicine gardens. I mean, when I used to do a lot of landscaping, and it was before permaculture was that popular, and people wanted, like, I don't want to do any maintenance and I just want to look at it. But when I started getting them excited about, herbs and berries and fruit and flowers and medicine and ways that they can interact with their garden, they go, well, I'll work for food. They get excited about that. So I would say that's one, but it's simple. You don't need to plant 20 fruit trees. You've got to be careful because people, you've got to harvest all that. So keep it simple, keep it small, but, for a client until you know how much they really want to interact with it. But, berries and fruit, and then maybe some raised beds for some vegetables that are maybe got, if you have gophers, gopher proof, so they have some success in what they do. That kind of thing, I think, is becoming much more popular. On another scale, depending on where you live, maybe not here. I do a lot of work in the tropics, but natural filtered swimming pools, if anybody wants to get into that would be, but if you're in a dry land, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you're someplace where you have water, because the natural filtered swimming pools can also be emergency water catchment. There's many other functions a pool can do, but that's another one. So those are the two. And then of course, habitat, native, bird and butterfly gardens, theme gardens. Those get people excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great answers. And so, okay. So Penny, take us through, we have a couple more questions we'll get to here in a second, but I want to get into some more content. So I really think of you as an amazing plant person. Like what you've taught me about plants in the last 20 years is really foundational for how I set up my planting plans, how I interact with landscape design and everything. So tell us a little bit about your method for planting plants, or how you choose plants, how you either source them or grow them out, and anything that you can suggest for how our students here could have really great ecological or permaculture-based planting plans for their clients.
Okay. Well, first of all, I choose the plant species last. It's the last thing I choose. I think about the function and what we want, the sizes, and the climate, the microclimates, the conditions, the soil, the water, the maintenance capacities, and all of that first, and then I do the concept. It's kind of like working from patterns to details, and I do the concept. So like if you want a windbreak, for example, then you've just narrowed down your plant palette to plants that can handle wind, maybe ones that grow relatively quickly, or you can mix quick ones and slow ones together, but have both. Or if it's, I also do get into theme gardens. That helps, like bird and butterfly gardens or native gardens. Sometimes those are the same. And so once, for me, it's about narrowing down the plant palette, because there's hundreds of plants, and where do you start? And so you have to kind of narrow things down. And so you say, okay, I want a bird and butterfly garden, or things that are going to attract, lots of critters and pollinators. And then you overlay that over your, is it shady? Is it sunny? What kind of soil? Is it clay soil? Is it really well-drained soil? What's your water? And then maybe you don't have a lot of water, and then that's going to narrow you down a lot more, because then you go into the drought tolerant, and you might really be focusing on native plants at that point, because there's a lot of really awesome native plants that are really good for pollinators, because they've sort of co-evolved with the birds and the butterflies. So often native gardens for that. So you could just like do it down there. But if say you're okay, I like natives, but I'd like something a little more useful for me. You might start thinking about medicinal plants, because a lot of medicinal plants are great for birds and butterflies and pollinators. They're aromatic. They attract bees. They're great for pollinators, for not only that garden, but for the surrounding area as well. And then they bring insectivores, and then you can create a little ecosystem that way. Let's see, what would be like if you wanted to have like perennial, like berries and citrus or something, like you start thinking, and then also thinking about whether it's for you or for your client. What plants do they like? What are they going to use? What's, like, if like I happen to really love lemons, and so I planted a lot of lemons. And I planted lemons. I love oranges, but I didn't plant oranges because I don't get hot enough for oranges. If I planted oranges, they would just be sour. I'm not into sour oranges. So I planted lemons, and because they do well there. So it's also narrowing down plants that you like that will grow where you live or where the project is. But yeah, I choose the species last. And then I don't know if that helps, but that's what I do. And then thinking themes, Or maybe you
Yeah.
like orange flowers, you know, you can, I don't know.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's great by looking at function, which normal landscape designers don't design from function and usefulness. They design from aesthetic first. And so it seems, permaculturists and ecological designers, we really do come at it from a different point of view. And I know that there's some great plant resources that you have access to and that are coming up soon. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, you told me about some database that was
Yeah, it's not
happening?
online yet, but as this class progresses, I'm going to be meeting with the man who is putting this together. I'm going to be teaching with him in Bali in February, and he's a landscape architect from Australia. And he's putting together, it's called Botanica Online, and it's this incredibly comprehensive plant database. And I think the way he'll do it, it'll be a subscription-based database. You pay like a nominal fee a month, but it'll be well worth it. And then you can, have each project, you can put in plants for each project, and then you can sort them from, function, cultural requirements, color, watering requirements, shade, sun, and all that kind of thing. And it's going to be very exciting. Yeah, but I just got sent the link a couple of days ago, and I'm going to start exploring it. And he's going to coach me on it when I see him. But it's a
Have
little early for that.
have you looked you turned me on originally to that book Plants for the Future.
Yeah, and
Um
that's a database also.
yeah, I was just going to say, have you looked at that database much or
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's good. I mean, for me, if you're in the Western US, I think my favorite is Sunset Western Garden Book. The newer, later editions are off the charts. I love them. That's my first go-to book. If you're, and if you're in Arizona, New Mexico, I think it covers the whole Western US. Do you have anybody in Indonesia or India? I don't know.
Yeah,
Prosea.
I think we do have someone in Indonesia. Yes.
Yeah, there's the Prosea, Prosea. And if it's who I think it is, he already knows about this book. But that's another incredible plant resource. There's whole like 3 volumes on timber trees. And, so if you have plants that you would like to use, you could look up things in that book and they would tell you what the cultural requirements are and what they would need. And if you would, if it's a logical choice for your project.
Yeah. So we have another great question here. What kind of experiences do you have with starting an area of plants by seeding? For example, a meadow of native plants or medicinal plants, or do you prefer plants grown in a nursery?
I prefer plants grown in a nursery, especially if I'm doing it as a project, because that just takes too much maintenance to get things established. Some people have done that on small scale, like doing like a native grass garden, but you have to seed it really, really thick. The native grass seed's expensive. I think you're better off growing it out. If it's a small lawn or small grass project, you're better off growing it in flats. And some of them, you can get those deep tubes to get really deep roots, or having someone grow them out for you. You can actually get roll out sod native grass lawns now.
Yeah.
And that would be the easiest. I mean, it's different if you're doing it for yourself or if you're doing it for a client, because the maintenance and getting things established that's more than half of it.
Right, because you have to keep following up, and if you're seeding a landscape and then you have patches, you've got to go back, you've got to fill in those patches. Maybe it gets trampled by kids, or it gets, you got to keep people out of there for a little while, dogs.
And you often don't know what's in the soil before then, so you don't know sometimes what the weeds are, or the other plants, the volunteers that are going to be coming up.
Oh, right. So you'll have competition issues potentially.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Because native grasses grow very slowly compared to annual grasses. And if you've got like orchard grass or Timothy grass or something already in that soil, it's going to outcompete your native grasses continually, and it'll be a lot of work to get it established.
So shifting gears here a little bit more, I want to go back to Jessica Souza's questions. Um, so she asked, how do you structure a contract with clauses, make agreements with clients who have the intention of working, maintaining, harvesting, but don't ever get there, especially when their default neglect has significant consequences for maintenance, weeds, and etc.
Oh man, that's probably why I got out of the business. No, um,
Yeah.
that's a problem. That's a problem. I think if you can be as clear and as realistic as possible at the beginning with these people to say, this is what it's going to require to maintain this, um, that helps, so that they really go in with the lights on as much as possible. And that's another reason I think I made a little comment a little bit ago about starting small and starting simple if you're planting food, especially fruit trees, because they do take maintenance and they take pruning and they take harvesting, and you've got to pick the fruit up off the ground. And if you bring them, plant 20 apples, they just won't be able to deal with it. Give them 1 to 2 apple trees and 1 plum tree, and you can also graft on pollinating, if you need that. You can graft onto 1 tree if it's a small. I'm thinking if it's a small kind of suburban type project. If they really want a full on pumping food forest, that's another thing, and they really want production and they're going to want to sell the produce. That's a different thing. But then again, like, you have to still be really clear about what it's going to involve to maintain it. Like at least a week of pruning every winter, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I found that maintenance can be really tricky because if you're running a maintenance program, then you want to have a very clear schedules, right? So we'll say, like you said, okay, once a week we'll come and we'll do so many hours every week or every month, and you kind of take care of what's needed. But then sometimes more is needed during certain times of the year, like you got to prune all the trees during a certain time of year, or and and one thing that I found is if you don't have a clear recipe and the clients want to do it themselves, then you have to find a way to sort of let go of control a
Yeah.
little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I have these landscape signs that we put up, permaculture artisans, landscape by permaculture artisans. It has our information. And so sometimes right after an installation, we'll put those signs up. But then we have to make sure we go back and check it out 6 to 8 months down the line, because if we're
It's your
not the
name.
maintenance, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, it would be the ideal is to be design, build, maintain business, so you could employ people. It's a lot to keep going, as Eric, having done that. But to just design, that's the same thing that happens. A contractor can change on their own. They think they get a better idea that they haven't thought through. That's happened before with me. So I generally don't that I don't like if right now what I do is I consult, and then if somebody wants a design, then I pass it on to someone else, because to install it, if the contractor does not install it as per plan, it still comes back to you as the designer if something doesn't work right. So you have to, if you're just doing design work, then you have to be really strict. And you may have a take on this, Eric, because you may have different experience with this, but with me, you have to be really strict. That's been my experience of as per plan. Like you have to design it exactly the way, install it exactly the way it's been designed. But ideally, we had a design build firm, so we could put in our own designs. And if we got a better idea, that was fine, because we know the whole breadth and we've thought through the whole design already. So if we want to make a change, it's much easier. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then
Well,
the maintenance is, if you can maintain it and have even just a weekly contract, and then maybe 2 seasonal contracts to say, we'll come in with some extra labor every spring and every fall or something like that.
yeah. And what we found is definitely the design build has really worked for us. Like you said, I mean, really what happens is if you're not doing design build and you're just doing design and other people are going to install, then your design costs, your client's design costs go way up. And
Yeah.
you
Because you
have
have to
to,
draw everything out.
yeah, you have to be detailed to down to here's exactly how many plants at this size, at this spacing. You need to have construction notes. And so your design costs go way up. And what I found, and I know it's client dependent, I don't know if you've experienced this, Penny, but what I found is that a lot of clients are more willing to, want to spend their money more on the install than they want to on the design. And so it's the benefit of being a design build firm that we can keep design costs lower because we're doing concept plans and not to the detailed construction plans. And then my crew can install, we've done this for over a decade. We can install these things and make those in the field decisions that one would have to put on a design to hand off over to someone else. We don't have to do that now. We can just do it when we install. But it is an issue that comes up, and I believe there's liability, like you said. There's accountability and liability that comes up if you're not the one doing the install. Then you really have to get that design to a high level of detail, and you really have to follow through. Almost like you almost have to keep up with the installation process to ensure that the design's getting done. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, I do agree with that. And that you write that into the contract. You write that into your contract in terms of overseeing, each phase and approving each phase of
yeah,
installation. And you're kind of in control. And it does cost the client a lot more. It's depending on people's personalities. I don't prefer to be that person. That's not my personality. I don't enjoy being overseeing other people's work and then if having to critique it if it's not right. That's not fun for me. but the design build is where it's at. And I think, to your point, I think that's one thing to point out to clients is that they would save a lot of money by hiring them to do both the design and the installation.
now the one
Yeah.
thing that does come up in a company the size of my company, where I've got 15 to 20 employees and different foremen and project managers and such, is, and I think most of our students at this point aren't at that level, but hopefully you'll get there if you want to get there. But one of the issues I've found is that, so while we're not doing details for the client because they're not paying for that level of design, being that we have multiple projects happening at the same time, we still have to provide our foreman with enough
Oh
information
yeah.
so that they can
Yeah.
do a good job. And it's that little edge right there that gets us at Permaculture Artisans, at least, where, how much detail do we have to provide our foreman? Are we just doing construction details now? And how do we, where do we bill this? Often at that point, we're billing it in the installation contract as ongoing design tweaking or whatever, as
Right.
part of the installation process.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's where having a good foreman really makes sense. One that has good judgment calls and problem solving skills and being able to see. It really is seeing into the future as designers to problem solve and kind of kick the can down the road, see where it's going to go so that you make good decisions. And yeah, I've never run, I don't think, as big of a company as you have, Eric. So I can't really speak to that. I usually would only have like one foreman, maybe two max. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely as we scale our businesses, new issues, new design challenges crop up
Right.
as our businesses scale, and that's one for us. So just taking a couple more questions here. Let's see. Let's stick on the plant thing for a sec, and then we'll go. There's a bigger level question, but there's a question here. When you have gardens that have lawns and you want to plant let's say, a food forest in that place, what methods have you found are best in preparing and improving the soil?
Oh, yeah. Easy. Sheet mulching. It's so easy and it's so great. And cardboard is mostly what we use because but you could use newspaper depending on if you have soy-based inks and not lead-based inks where you live. But laying down cardboard, and then I use wood chip mulch. I like the way it looks, and I like the fungal content in it. And then you can just dig a hole and right in the lawn and plant whatever you're going to plant, and then sheet mulch around it. And if it's a big project, you could, in fact, leave the lawn space in between as the pathway, and then when you're watering, well, you have to design your watering how you do, but, you could just leave the lawn. Does that make sense? And use that to plant. Ideally, it'd be better to have something like clover or something, but if that's what you've got, I'm thinking like if you've got a dense kind of like sod type lawn.
Yeah, that's a cool idea, because then, some people like to walk barefoot in their gardens and stuff. And it's always, when we're doing putting wood chips down for pathways, that's a little rough on the bare feet. So yeah, if you're able to, I like that idea. If you can incorporate grass into your pathways and maintain it, if it works for the project, that's a cool integration.
It's actually easier to maintain if you just mow it. It's just the width of a mower. And you can just mow it. It's actually easier than having to weed it or sheet mulch it again.
Yeah. So we have a big, like a sort of a more macro level question here from Adam. And he asks, can you speak a little to what direction you think permaculture and eco-landscaping are moving in the country and world and in the future, and where you think our collective energies should be moving?
Let's see. Well, I'll tell you what it is I'd like to see, and I don't know if that's realistic, but I'd like to see people really feel an ethic towards those that don't have a voice, like all their neighbors, their non-human neighbors, and that people evolve to have a feeling of responsibility and reciprocity towards the wild creatures that live in their gardens and in around their gardens, and start designing for them as well as for the human element. I've done that. Sometimes I laugh at myself as I'm shooing away, great blue herons as they're trying to eat my fish and stuff. But, it's like we're part of creation. And I think there's a responsibility as landscapers, and I don't want to say an opportunity. Let me use that word. There's an opportunity as landscapers to start teaching your clients deep nature connection, and teaching your clients the excitement of being able to, go out and see the butterflies and the birds, and know that what they're doing in their garden isn't poisoning them, and know that what they're doing is feeding them. And to kind of share the abundance with the critters around you. Sometimes, that said, I have also been known to rail about the entitlement of wildlife because sometimes they'll come in and eat everything. It's like, wait, share, can you like eat half my peaches and leave me some? But
I remember in one of your gardens, you did a really cool thing that I haven't seen anybody do, which is that you actually allowed the deer into your garden at a certain time of year to provide a management function.
Yeah, because they would eat all the windfalls and the grounders, the apples that fell on the ground and kind of rotting, and they loved those, and they would come in and clean up the ground. And if you have a really abundant garden, like a real permaculture garden full of, this cornucopia, they don't actually even really find your roses necessarily. I had not one, I had 4 deer in my garden this year, pretty much all summer. And the fruit trees, they nipped on the bottom branches, but they didn't really do that much damage.
So I love what you're saying about the nature connection. And I've kind of feel like you're sort of one of the pioneers where like when you had the programming with the Nature Awareness School, and you brought a lot of the real old school nature awareness methodologies and assessment processes together with permaculture design. And so how can nature awareness skills really aid us in our design processes?
Oh, well, it's huge. I mean, that's such a big question. We could do a whole webinar just on that. Well, to start with, if you're deeply connected to that site, you're having a conversation with that site. You're in dialogue with the land itself. And this is how I approached my first garden, is I considered this garden to be my teacher, my guru, and I would do something, and then the volunteers. This is why I started earlier to say, I don't really believe in weeds, because what's a weed? And a lot of plants that we consider to be weeds are some of the most useful plants, and they're coming up to do a service. So I would plant something, and then if something else came up, like it could be dandelions, or it could be mullein, or it could be curly dock, or liver cleansers, or it could be mallow. These are all common weeds that are extraordinarily valuable as medicine and habitat for pollinators and for the soil. So in my experience, what happens is you have this conversation, and I'll say something, and the earth will respond with something, and then we kind of talk about it. And sometimes I'll favor certain plants and pull out other plants. So I do, weed, but I do it very judiciously. And what ended up happening is that I kind of changed my sense of aesthetics. And at one point I had a bed and breakfast. So I had bed and breakfast guests coming. And there was one particular time and I was really committed, like, I'm not going to let my ego get in the way. This is my own garden, not for client. I'm not going to let my ego get in the way of people wanting to think I'm this or that. And so the garden looking good. And it was a time when the garden was going to seed and things were sort of dying back. And these clients or these guests came to the bed and breakfast, and they had come from my neighbor who happened to be German. And I don't know if it's a stereotype, but like every flower in that garden had their marching orders. I mean, everything in that garden was perfect. And they came to my garden, and it was particularly wild because it was in the fall. And I was a little embarrassed, going, oh, it's not looking so good, but this is what it is. This is the phase that this garden is in. And it was also in its infancy. It was new, it hadn't evolved to where it ended up becoming amazing all year, but it was still at the beginning and not so complex. So what happened was the people ended up writing me a letter later and said they really loved my garden because they said the plants were allowed to grow rather than being made to grow. Is something happening with the microphone? Oh, so the plants were being allowed to grow rather than being made to grow. And I realized that I was kind of underestimating people. Like, they were really seeing and feeling the energetic of the garden itself. So, that's people, like, I've worked for people that were, worked for banks or in insurance companies and stuff. And I would think, oh, they don't really know anything about nature. And I'd be so wrong about that, because they really do. They know the deer that comes every day into their garden, and they know the birds that come, and the seasonal birds. And, people know and have more connection to nature than sometimes I would give them credit for when I was first doing this work with the public. And what I've learned is people are connected. There's a longing, there's a yearning for that. So, and also that's what sent me to permaculture, because I was really getting tired of just comforting the rich. I wanted to work for people who wanted to have a relationship with their garden. And so I started basically interviewing the clients as much as they were interviewing me for a job. And if they were interested and willing to be engaged in the garden and work with me on the plan, I was much more excited about working with people like that. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny how when we are open to the natural world and we're able to listen to the patterns of animals and plants and stuff, how it affects our decision making. The other day, I was looking at this maple tree that's kind of growing near my house. I was thinking about fire safety and how I need to trim this tree back really hard. And also, rats are climbing up and getting on the roof and stuff. And so I'm thinking about how I have to manage this tree for fire and rat safety. And as I was up there trimming, I just kind of dawned on me that like all the branches are covered in usnea.
Oh, nice.
And so all of a sudden, so I'm hanging out with my kids and we're talking about usnea, because actually my daughter just the day before asked about how do you tell when something is usnea, because we know it's a medicinal species. And so now all of a sudden my whole view of how I'm going to manage this tree has totally changed, because now I'm actually managing this medicinal crop of usnea, not just hacking branches away off the house and stuff. And so I feel like there's a lot of little nuance, a lot of detail when we really open ourselves to the awareness of what's happening with plants and animals, that would change the kind of decision making that we would have in a design process. Because now I'm not just pruning a tree for function in terms of fire safety, but now I'm actually managing a yield instead.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can get your clients to think that way, then you're cruising, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or for them to start to open up and notice things like that. In fact, that could be part of like the maintenance. What would be an ideal thing would be is that the client comes out and maintains the garden with you in your, so you have a day a week that you work with them in the garden, and you're out there together and teaching them things as they,
Well, what's funny is I taught a permaculture class all day today. And one of the questions that came up was, have you ever had a client that changed as a part of the process of receiving a landscape and seeing the design and having it, be installed, and then the follow-up maintenance? Her question was, have you ever had a client that's changed the way they look at the earth or the way they look at their place on the planet? And I was telling the story about, we've had a few situations like that where a client who didn't know anything about plants, nothing about landscapes, nothing about gardens. We designed and installed the garden for them, a food forest. And I remember with this particular client, about 4 years later, I went back, and I'd stay in touch with them, but I had like a meaningful interaction with them 4 years later. And she was like this incredible homesteader where she had developed all of these recipes for harvesting and processing her food and her plants and her medicine. She was making medicine with her kids. And this became part of her, what she focused on every day now was how to get the most out of her food forest. Whereas before she didn't know anything about plants or anything.
Wow. That's incredible. That's it. That's the work. And that's what's the most exciting part about ecological landscaping. Because the way conventional landscaping is, and a lot of times, you're installing big shrubs and big trees and bringing things in. And I had one of my aha moments was that I realized, this is an evolutionary process. So at first it might be the perennial layer that is dominating the landscape. And then in 3 or 4 years, it might be the shrub layer that's going to, start to take hold. But ultimately, it might be the valley oaks or, the oak trees or the tree layer. And then they'll shade out the other things, and it'll, kind of evolve over time. And it's a successionary thing. And no one ever explained that to me. I had to kind of like see it for myself. It's like, duh.
Yes.
Got it. But, but in conventional landscaping, it isn't like that. It's almost like they're treating plants like furniture. You're moving in these giant, 24-inch box trees and 15-gallon shrubs so that it looks as mature as possible the day you leave the site. I mean, that's kind of what it was like working for developers, and they'd pay the money to do it. And it was lucrative to do it. But it wasn't as fulfilling as watching a landscape and a garden evolve.
Yeah. And I found too that sometimes you'll plant the 15-gallon established plant, next to the 1 gallon, and in 5 years they're the same size anyway.
Yeah, there you go. That's true.
So there was a question here, and I almost don't want to lob it in because I know exactly what you're going to say, but there was a question here of Bermuda. Have you dealt with it? How do you deal with Bermuda grass?
Oh yeah. Well, you know what I'm going to say. Sheet mulch. I've sheet mulched it, and I'll just tell you, it's a reprieve. It's not, you don't go in just one time and sheet mulch your Bermuda grass. You lay down some pretty thick cardboard and wood chips, and what it will do is it's a rhizomatous grass, and it will wind its way through and back to the surface. And so what you have to do, as soon as you see that grass come back to the surface, you reach down and you pull it up. And it's really actually very satisfying, because you'll end up pulling up this huge gob of roots with it that are all like curled. You'll have to experience it. You'll believe it when you see it. But if you don't do that and you just think, okay, I sheet mulched and I've done my thing and that's it, you come back in 1 to 2 years and it will take hold of that sheet mulch, and it's scary. It'll just take going there. But if you, so what the sheet mulch does is gives you a reprieve, and why it's more effective than just pulling it up all the time is you're not disturbing the soil. So if you're constantly pulling it up all the time, you're basically popping up and propagating new little bits of roots and breaking off new roots that grow into new plants. And it's an impossible exercise in futility. And so sheet mulch really does help, but you have to keep on it. The other thing, depending on what you're doing, is if you say you have a tree and you don't want your Bermuda grass growing underneath your tree, because the roots of the Bermuda grass will compete with the mouth of the tree, because the mouth of the trees, like say a fruit tree, is in the top 6 inches of the soil, and that's where the Bermuda grass roots are, and they'll compete for nutrients. So you don't want them around the roots of your tree. So if you can keep them out away from your tree, you can also plant biologic or root barriers with comfrey or lemongrass or any sort of fibrous rooted plant really densely in a circle around the zone where you're trying to keep the Bermuda grass out. That's another trick you can do. And I've done it successfully. I've seen it done successfully. It's hard to do that on a large scale, but on a smaller scale, like around trees and stuff, it works.
Yeah. So, so we're getting kind of ready, kind of near the end, ready to wrap it up, folks. We've gone a bit longer because we had that issue in the middle there where the power went out and we had to start with part 2. Thank you so much for bearing with us on that, and I'm sorry that happened. And so Penny, what are you up to these days? How can we follow your work? How can we support the work you're doing in the world and learn more about you?
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm in the process of simplifying my life, and I'm actually going to move into a smaller garden where I'm going to have a 1/4 acre of flat after doing 4 acres. Now I'm going down to a 1/4 acre, which is fine, kind of a little suburban situation. And, just so you know, I'm going to be planting it'll be up in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm going to be planting lots of lavender that grows well there, and blueberries, and a lot of berries that grow really well there. And I'm going to have a few fruit trees, probably no more than 5 max. And I'm going to be traveling and kind of an itinerant teacher. So if people are interested in learning permaculture, or I do herbal medicine courses where we make a lot of remedies. It's a very hands-on, practical class that I do, or natural building, projects, things like that. I'll have more time to travel and teach, and I'm going to be doing maybe some webinars with you and just kind of staying in touch with me. I guess that's one way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things that Penny and I are working on is a short online course on regenerative agroforestry, where Penny's going to really dive deep into the process of designing and installing and planning out agroforestry systems. So we're very excited to work with you on that, Penny.
Yeah, and we'll get into specific species and different plant communities and things like that. Get much more specific.
And so the Regenerative Design Institute, can people follow you there, or what's the status there?
Yeah, good question. So our website is regenerativedesign.org, and we're going to be transitioning in the next couple of months. We're going to be phasing out. We're moving away from the garden that I've been, that we basically restored and put together for the last 13, 14 years. And it's going to become an integrated medicine center, kind of connecting nature and medicine, Natura Institute for Nature and Medicine. That's going to be run by our Dr. Anna O'Malley, and she's going to move in, and we're going to move up to the Pacific Northwest, and we're going to take RDI with us. So it will continue to be a program of Commonweal. You should check out commonweal.org. Is an incredibly visionary organization that we're part of. And we'll continue to be part of that. And we'll probably organize I'll probably organize a 2-week PD permaculture design training every year through that. But it's gonna be much more on the altar. We're not going to be as active as we've been in the past with RDI, but it will be still functioning as we choose to start something. But I'm really not interested in being an institution builder anymore, and I'm much more interested in just being me. So if people, are interested in, I'm much more interested in just freelancing on my own and not having to support an organization. So that's really more what I'm up to.
Wise move, Penny. You have earned your dues to
Simplify.
have a more simple life. And is that regenerativedesign.org or regenerativedesigninstitute.org?
No, it's regenerativedesign.org.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm just putting this in the chat here.
Thanks.
And so great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time tonight to join us and for weathering the technological difficulties here. Any last thing you want to leave us with before we cut out for the night?
Well, I just think, as an ecological landscaping as a field, it's really ripe and ready. And for people getting into it now, I think whatever you're going to be investing in your learning, it's going to pay for itself. I think it's an incredible field because you can be so creative with it and you can learn so much with it. So I just want to say good luck to everybody, and you're in really good hands with this beautiful man, Eric Olson.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. The record of these Expert Hangout will get uploaded to the student portal, and you can always come back to it in the link in the mastermind group. In next week, or what is it? Or in 2 weeks, we have our next live question and answer hangout with myself, and we'll be in the next couple of weeks letting you know who all the experts are for the next few months and get that scheduled to you. Good luck to you all on your projects and all your endeavors. Let us know what's going on in the mastermind group and the mastermind community about your projects, where you're at, and what kind of support you need. So thanks again, and have a great night.
Great. Thank you.